XRP is an asset that has sustained and proven itself over a long period of time. It has a very strong community and very strong technology underneath. From my point of view, we haven't seen what it can do because the company Ripple has been engaged in this difficult lawsuit with the SEC.
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is one of the top crypto platforms in the industry. I've been a user of Uphold since 2018. They make it easy to buy, sell, and trade crypto. They have 300 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform, which includes Bitcoin and all the top altcoins. And folks, they do not commingle. They do not lend out your funds. They are 100% reserved, and you can review their transparency report. And they have a lot of great features that make it easy to execute your trades. They also have a great new product called USD interest accounts, which allows you to park your dry powder or your crypto profits and earn up to 4.9% APY. Now, the 4.9% APY is only on balances over $1,000. Below 1,000, it's 2%. But what's great about this product, guys, is there's no lockups, there's no monthly fees, there's no subscriptions, and best of all, it is FDIC insured just like a bank. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, visit the link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and my guest today is Matt Hougan, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Bitwise Asset Management. Matt, great to see you. Happy Friday.
Tony, happy Friday. It's so good to be here.
Matt, the vibes are off the charts as we've been talking about before the recording. We have a pro crypto president coming in, the most pro crypto Congress ever coming in, and the markets are rallying and ETF buying is blowing records out of the water. How are you feeling about all these things?
Yeah, it's been a pretty amazing week at the end of a pretty amazing year, right? We have come a long way this year. I feel like we've just shifted the Overton window of what's possible in crypto. There are now active discussions about the US government buying 1 million Bitcoin for a Bitcoin stockpile. We're seeing, filings and statements. It's just an incredible time to be involved in this industry.
You brought it up, and I wanted to ask about that. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, we saw states are starting to do this as well. Yesterday, Pennsylvania has a bill that they introduced. Matt, if this thing goes through, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to be FOMO for Bitcoin globally?
I think, well, two things are going to happen. Yes, absolutely. It's going to be FOMO for Bitcoin globally. If you're another country looking at the US and it actually moves forward on acquiring a strategic reserve with 1 million Bitcoin, you can no longer be certain of how the future will develop vis-a-vis crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. And as a result, you're going to need to get in line. You're going to need to stake your position before it is too late. So I think it will kick off a wave of purchases from nation states, and the impact on the market will be significant. Look, countries around the world own more than 20% of the gold market. Until we get to equilibrium there, you can say that that's a gap that needs to be filled. It's looking increasingly likely that that will be filled in the next couple of years.
So to your point, it may not happen this cycle, but the conversation, the dialogue's happening. You already have countries that have made Bitcoin a legal tender. There's some that are buying, adding it to their reserves and so forth. But it feels like we're at the dawn of the next Bretton Woods, that this asset is getting recognition and adoption globally. And it seems like these central banks and world governments will eventually get there and come together and say, yeah, this is something we need to put right aside of gold.
Yeah, I think at least you have to consider that as a possibility, right? If you back up 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, people talked about this idea of central banks adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets or governments positioning strategic stockpiles of Bitcoin, but it was crazy talk. You would be laughed out of rooms for suggesting that. Now the poly market odds, I think, are at about 50% on whether the US will move forward on this or not. We have sitting senators putting forward bills that would push this forward. It's now firmly within the realm of possibility. And that means you can't discount it if you're evaluating how to position yourself in this asset. It certainly increases the upside potential. It also makes the asset extremely hard to short because you could wake up any morning with this news and you don't want to be on the wrong side of it. So I think it's really important. Whether we get there or not, I don't know, but I think you have to consider it as being possible.
Mm. Matt, yesterday the folks at Bloomberg shared a chart showing the collective supply of Bitcoins bought through the ETFs from all issuers, including Bitwise, and it is set to surpass Satoshi's holdings very soon. This is kind of wild. I don't even know what to expect if that happens. It seems there is so much demand for this asset.
Yeah, I think the really incredible thing is I expect 2025 flows into Bitcoin ETFs to exceed 2024 flows. So as much as we've seen, I think it's really just a down payment on this market. If we fast forward a few years, I would not be surprised to see, Bitcoin ETFs owning, 10, 20% of the Bitcoin market. I certainly think that's within the realm of possibility down the road. It has been an incredible launch, the most successful ETF launch of all time. But it's still true that most traditional investors have not yet allocated. So I do think this is just a down payment, and people probably underestimate where we can go from here.
Do you think the price action we're seeing, breaking through 90,000 and much more, that's going to drive a bit of FOMO with the retail, the RIAs, the wealth managers to say, okay, we need to have our clients have exposure to this?
Yeah, I think there's both. There's FOMO, which is certainly real. And, I expect to see, let's say, wirehouses who have been slow to allow access to Bitcoin ETFs. I expect to see that process accelerate. I expect to see more institutions looking at their peers like Emory University adding allocations to Bitcoin and saying maybe we should get off zero as well. But there's another element to it, Tony, which is the reflexivity in the Bitcoin market is actually fundamental, which is different from how reflexivity works in other markets. By that, I mean, as more people adopt Bitcoin and as the price goes up, to a certain point, Bitcoin legitimately becomes more valuable because it is more widely accepted, it is more liquid, it is more established, it's less likely to go to zero. And I think you're going to start to see that positive fundamental reflexivity playing out in Bitcoin over the next couple of years as this truly goes from alternative to mainstream, which is the mega trend that we're seeing right now.
Matt, do you think the folks at Vanguard are kicking themselves like we effed up here?
They're going to get there eventually. They're going to get there eventually. Tony, as you know, I come from the ETF space. Vanguard today is one of the largest ETF providers in the world. But in the early days of ETFs, they were very skeptical. They hated them. They talked about them harming investors. They eventually got there. They're going to eventually get there on Bitcoin as well. They aren't the only person to take a skeptical initial view and then eventually convert. BlackRock, 2017, Larry Fink called Bitcoin an index of money laundering.
Yeah.
Today, they're one of the more powerful forces in this industry. So, we'll let Vanguard cook. They'll get there eventually. I'm not that worried.
Yesterday, I saw you tweeted out ETH ETF flows are going to surprise people in 2025. What are you expecting for ETH in next year?
Yeah, I think they could be really substantial. The net flows into ETH ETFs just went positive. We obviously saw a lot of outflows from ETH upon conversion to an ETF, and the inflows have just surpassed that. But I think ETH is really appealing to an institutional audience. We talked about this a few times on the podcast previously, but institutions love the utility of ETH. They love the cash flow-like characteristics of ETH. They're very interested in stable coins and tokenization, which is being built on ETH. ETH is sort of removing the last shackles of regulatory clouds that have been hovering over it. I think you're going to see a lot of institutions wanting exposure to ETH in the new year. I'd add one more thing, Tony, which is I think you're going to see a lot more investors looking for broadly diversified exposure to crypto. One of the things that's happening right now in crypto is what we discussed at the beginning of the pod, which is the Overton window is shifting on what's possible. Could we see ETFs on more assets? Could we see institutions building on chains that are maybe, don't have ETFs associated with them? We're starting to see that already. And I think a lot of institutions are just going to want broad-based exposure. So I'm excited about ETH specifically. I'm excited about other assets. I'm excited about index. I think that's going to grow substantially in 2025.
Speaking of index, yesterday you got news that New York Stock Exchange Arca filed for a 19B-4 to uplist Bitwise's top 10 index fund as an ETF. Tell us about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the regulations, I can't comment much more than what's on the file. But yes, NYSE Arca filed to uplist BITW as an ETP. We'll see how that works through the system. But I think if you broaden out again, there are two mega themes that are going on right now. One is that we're getting a regulatory shift from no ETFs to a broad-based ETF market. We actually saw that under the current administration, right? As much as we all worry about Gary Gensler and many of us dislike Gensler's leadership of the SEC, we did see the approval of spot Bitcoin and spot Ethereum ETFs under that administration. We're in the ETF era of crypto. I think particularly if we get a change to a more pro-crypto environment, there's a potential for multiple crypto ETPs. So I think that's one thing to pay attention to. And then the other thing is what I mentioned before, which is I think the demand for index-based products could be really substantial. If you believe institutional capital is coming into this space and wants a small allocation to crypto, many of them will just want to make a diversified bet. That's what they do in stocks. That's what they do in bonds. That's what they do in real estate. That's what they'll want to do in crypto. So I think that could be a significant trend if we see progress on this uplisting application in 2025. And you, fingers crossed, we'll see what happens.
And even retail, right? I like, for example, I'll give my mom as an example. She told me to buy her Bitcoin, ETH, and yet some other assets. But if you have like like an index fund, like the Nasdaq or the S&P 500, just it captures everything. It makes it so easy for a lot of investors.
100%. And even me, right? Outside of Bitcoin, which is, I think, standalone as the leading monetary asset, when we get into this other space, I'm excited about what's happening on ETH. I'm excited about what's happening on Solana. I'm excited with the reinvigoration of XRP. I'm excited about what's happening on Avalanche and Aptos and Sui and Monad and Barachain and many other protocols, right? I'm excited about all of them. And I could try to throw a dart and hit the one that is going to emerge. But it's going to be hard to find that, and it may be many of them. And so if that's your point of view, if it's your mom, if it's me, if it's an endowment, I think many people share that point of view. And for them, an index-based solution is a really nice choice.
Absolutely. And going back real quick to the ETH ETF, I just thought that look, with the change in the regime at the SEC, we could see the staking get approved next year, which would be so appealing for many investors to have the yield in addition to holding the underlying asset.
Yeah, you do see abroad internationally, you see ETH staking ETPs, and obviously that makes it more appealing. It makes it a net positive to own. It overwhelms the expense ratio. I do expect to have, those sorts of conversations with regulators happening next year. I also expect, people to start to push for in-kind creations and redemptions on ETPs. So we're going to get some efforts to iterate on the existing ETPs to make them even more perfect, as well as new ETPs. I do think hopefully that dialogue will continue and sort of accelerate in 2025.
So Matt, there's a whole army that wants me to ask you about the XRP Spot ETF you guys filed even before the election, which was amazing. Why did you guys decide to do it and the timing and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's first talk about the asset before I talk about the filing. XRP is an asset that has sustained and proven itself over a long period of time. It has a very strong community and very strong technology underneath. From my point of view, we haven't seen what it can do because the company Ripple has been engaged in this difficult lawsuit with the SEC, which is sort of like trying to operate with two arms tied behind your back.
Mm.
I think if we fast forward a year into the future, if we get positive developments in that space, you'll see XRP unleashed. What can it do in the market? It's proven its technology. It has a unique approach to the market. It has a strong community behind it. It has liquidity. It has interest from traditional Wall Street firms. We saw that with SocGen, expanding their stablecoin onto the ledger earlier this week. I think it's a really interesting idea. Like, what can this asset do if it is unleashed? So that's sort of the investment thesis without going too deep into the ways it's sort of iterating and developing. And then, from a filing perspective, again, constrained with what I can say, but I've said this before every time we file, which is that Bitwise doesn't file for fun.
Mm.
We filed because we think there is a pathway to launch a product. We're not always right. We filed for a Bitcoin ETF for 5 years before we eventually got there. So take that with that grain of salt. But the reason we filed is because we thought there was a pathway to get it launched. Otherwise, we wouldn't have filed. And we're excited to continue to pursue that in 2025, particularly with the new administration.
Can we expect more altcoin spot ETF applications?
I think it's likely you're going to see the industry try to expand the type of assets that are available in ETPs. Yes.
Mm.
There's some challenges there.
Sure.
Altcoins are different than Bitcoin and Ethereum, where they're regulated futures markets and there are other things you can point to. But again, I look abroad and I see a wide variety of crypto ETPs that have lowered costs and made it more secure for investors to gain exposure to these interesting assets. I would love that to be true here in the US as well. And Bitwise and other high quality firms, I think, will be pushing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was some big news this week that Bitwise made another acquisition, and that was Attestant, if I'm saying it right. Tell us about that acquisition and the goal there.
Yeah, we're really excited about Attestant. It's an incredible team. They're one of the leading staking providers in the Ethereum ecosystem for institutional clients. I think there's something like 3, 4 billion in staked assets that they help manage and pursue. This is an important part of the ecosystem. We're calling it Bitwise on-chain solutions. Bitwise wants to be a service provider to investors looking to access the opportunities in that space. Some of that will take place in the traditional asset management side, ETPs, et cetera. Some of it will be on-chain solutions. I think you can think of this as Bitwise staking its flag in the ground, that this is a direction that we're moving in that we think will be much more important in the future than it is today. And we're really excited about the team that has come on board and helped us expand into this market.
What do you think the future of staking looks like, given this acquisition and so forth, with institutions and retail? Is this going to be, let me add some context here. In a economy where things are struggling, we're dealing with inflation, certain traditional assets are not performing well, is staking in some of these proof of stake blockchains going to become more prominent as a way for people to earn because they're not getting any type of interest in their bank accounts and things like that, but they can put it in an asset where they earn a higher yield.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, look, if you look at the traditional financial system, a lot of what it does is it takes people's idle assets and turns them into profit centers for banks.
Yeah.
I mean, that is effectively what the banking industry does. It's a lot of what the brokerage industry does. If you look at a business like Charles Schwab, they make a huge amount of their money off cash deposits that they underpay from an interest perspective.
Mm.
And that should frustrate every investor. They are your assets, and you should derive the economic value that they can generate. One way to think about staking from a big picture perspective is it allows, the actual owners of the assets to accrue the vast majority of the economic value that can come from them. It allows you to put it to work in the market. And of course, I think that's going to be much more important in the future than it is today. And every investor should be excited about that. That doesn't mean every asset should be staked or 100% of assets should be staked or that it's risk-free. But a lot of the reasons that many of us got into crypto is we saw things in the traditional financial industry that didn't feel right.
Yeah.
This is an example of something that doesn't feel right to me. And I'm excited to see these staking services come online and gain bigger traction to sort of put that in investors' favor primarily. So that's the big picture way I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, amazing stuff. I am so excited. I am hoping Bitcoin hits 100K. We're very close before the end of the year, but it looks like 2025 is going to be brighter days. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate the insights.
Thanks for having me and having me back again. I look forward to doing it again in a few months.